Hey folks, today I want to address a little bit more scripture than I normally do. Now, I don't want to say this in every video, but there are some people who may not be familiar with the purpose of Nos Logos. So just to very briefly say, the objective of this ministry is to give support and encourage those who have previously been part of the occult or who are still dealing with it or trying to come out of it, as well as to educate people about the occult and occult practices, mysticism, magic, sorcery, those types of things. And I've done a number of videos in the past to address those topics a little bit more in depth. And I continue to intend to make more videos that will address them in depth. But sometimes it's been a bit of a concern or questioning, well, where is the scripture enforced in these videos? What is it that we can draw from the scriptures and not focus on these things? And the reason why I have focused on those other topics in depth is because of my past, my experience of those things, and to give further insight. Not in a positive way, not in a way to focus on it, but in a way to point out some of the dangers, some of the downfalls, some of the very deceitful things that the enemy can use against us. There is no other source that has more support and more mentioning of the demonic world, of the satanic realm, than the scripture itself, than the Bible itself. And so there are even some believers who are in denial, like, oh, well, that's just kind of hocus pocus, it doesn't happen nowadays, there's nothing. Well, I'm here to tell you that it does. There are others who can vouch for this. So I want to begin, if we open up our scriptures and we look at the Gospel of Matthew. If in the very first gospel, now there's some debate as to whether the synoptic gospels are based on one source or they're independently written or a combination of the two. Whatever the case, when we open up our scriptures, and the first book that we turn to in the New Testament, the Brit Chadashah in Hebrew, is the Gospel of Matthew. Let's delve into that. Let's see what our actual teacher has to say, what Christ has to say about this. And if we turn to Matthew chapter 4, one of the first few chapters in the scriptures, what happens? Chapter 4, verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights, he then became hungry. And the tempter came out and said to him, if you are the Son of God, command that the stones become bread. But he answered and said, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Then the devil took him into the holy city and had him stand on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Jesus said to him, on the other hand, it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, all these things I will give you if you fall down and worship me. Then Jesus said to him, go, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God and serve him only. Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and began to minister to him. Now, there is a whole lot that I could say and address this. Some people will dismiss it and say, okay, well, that was a brief encounter with the devil, and he just, he was able to have him flee. But there is a whole lot in here that I could address. And the Messiah himself is pitted up against Satan himself, the encounter that he has. And then we turn to, in the very same gospel again, let's turn here, to Chapter 8, verse 28. When Christ came to the other side into the country of the Gadarenes, two men who were demon-possessed met him, and they were coming out of the tombs. They were so extremely violent that no one could pass by that way, and they cried out, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now there was a herd of many swine feeding at a distance from them. The demons began to entreat him, saying, "If you are going to cast us out, send us into the herd of swine." And he said to them, "Go." And they came out and went into the swine, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the waters. The herdsmen ran away and went into the city and reported everything, including what had happened to the demoniacs. Now, this is another encounter of Christ confronting demons. The next chapter, chapter 9, verse 32. As they were going out, a mute, demon-possessed man was brought to him. After the demon was cast out, the mute man spoke, and the crowds were amazed and were saying, "Nothing like this has ever been in Israel." But the Pharisees were saying, "He casts out the demons by the ruler of the demons." Now, these are just three examples within one book, one gospel, just chapters apart. Now, obviously, a lot has happened before, in between, and after that. But I'm pointing these scriptures out that individually have a lot of commentary to each of them that I could address. But it's just to reinforce the fact that if there were encounters with Satan, with Messiah himself, you don't think Satan is going to attack us? And there are other examples of that. You don't think that there are still demon-possessed people now? Oh, well, that just happened back then. That doesn't really happen now. Folks, as I said at the offset, the point of this is to try and help point out how these things still happen in our day, whether we seek them out actively or whether they come to us involuntarily. Nos Logos is a ministry to put on the armor of God and attack these things, not in a hysterical way. There are other ministries that I've seen either online or in person who take this way too far in a sense that, the devil is under every rock and you've got to be paranoid with every little thing. I don't believe that personally, especially from my own experience. We do a lot to seek things out, to cause things to happen. And other times he does come and invite himself and approaches just like he did Messiah, or come in our path. And those are things that I've addressed in the past in other videos and things that I'll continue to address. But folks, I just read you 3 very real encounters with Christ and Satan himself and demons themselves. So there is a basis to acknowledge that these things happen. These encounters are real. They themselves are real. They're not just fantasy. Because, folks, if you think this is just fantasy or made up or hocus pocus or things that are just in our minds in this portion of Scripture, then you basically have to throw out all of Scripture. Whether we go back into the Old Testament and look at Moses and the whole encounter with Solomon and his pagan wives and having different encounters and being influenced by them. We have to throw out the entirety of scriptures. If we say, oh, well, that's just fantasy. That's not really historically what happened, or that was just in those times. And now we have the advent of science, and we have the Enlightenment, and we no longer have encounters with Satan or demons. Demonology in and of itself is a whole study. Satanism during the 1960s became a formal religion. Prior to that, there were different types of or forms of Satanism that weren't actually called Satanism. But again, that's for another video. My point of this is just to draw from the actual scriptures themselves. In just one book and one gospel in Matthew, Christ encounters Satan himself. He does exorcisms twice of demons, one for the swine and the blind man. Folks, it is so important that we don't just overlook this. And it's also important that we have discernment in our day, in our times, of how these things still can come against us and attack us. And so that's what the purpose of Nos Logos is, to try and provide some encouragement, some help for people who are either who have either come out of the occult, who are still in it, or to educate people who haven't actively sought out those things, but may be ignorant to how they are still influenced by them. How there are still things that if you just go about your day and never pick up anything magical or mystical or satanic, there are still things that are fed into our unconscious or our subconscious. The idea that there is a billion-dollar industry, or arguably maybe even a trillion-dollar industry of advertising and marketing and ways to influence your decision-making, whether it's for buying clothing products, whether it's buying cars, whether it's how to vote in an election, whether it's to seek out things sexually on computers, on billboards, on a side note. This is something just kind of comical, but still sad. I drive with my wife and family to our congregation every week, and on the route there's a huge billboard that says the library. It's a huge billboard that says the library. Well, that billboard is an advertisement for a strip club. Yeah, a strip club. And I figured it out with my wife as we're driving past it. I'm like, wow. They have strategically named their strip club the library, so that technically, if a man goes to that strip club and he goes back home and his wife asks, "Hey, honey, where did you go today?" he could, with a straight face, tell her, "Oh dear, I went to the library." That's how seductive and sneaky the enemy can be. It sounds comical. We had a chuckle at it to say that it was not really a funny chuckle as much as a sad, one of those like, oh my goodness, this is just over the top. That they would invest the time and money and energy to come up with this, having that undeniably in the back of their heads, hey, let's name our place something that will allow men to use as an excuse without any questions asked, with a straight face, to say it honestly. Their wives probably wouldn't ask anything else after that, or at least they could preempt it even before they left and say, hey, honey, I'm going to go to the library. I'll be right back, or I'll be back shortly. I'm going to go, check out a few things, or whatever euphemisms could be used in order to get out of that. That's just one example that we saw recently on our way to our congregation. Actually, we've seen pretty frequently because we go through the same route. But that's just as an example of how, even if you don't actively seek it out, there's a huge billboard that could be put up there. There's something you're flipping through the channel on your TV, or you're surfing the web and you pass by something, or people wear T-shirts that could advertise something. There are a lot of subliminal messages that the enemy tries to use to get you to fall, to stumble, to sin, to go against God in whatever way. And it's because I have actively sought out some of these occult teachings and philosophy and ideas that it's given me kind of that, I guess, behind the scenes look, kind of seen it from the other side of how sneaky these things can be, how our mind can be manipulated, how the enemy can do things to get us into either a temporary fall or a prolonged lifestyle that is justified, rationalized. And the further we go down there, the enemy has little tricks that he can do. People have little things that they can use to either become possessed, like these examples in Scripture, or just have the encounter where they're still volitionally doing something in their lives. They may not be actually possessed, but they've succumbed to those influences in a way, consciously, to engage in that sin and that, for lack of a better term, Satanism. I refer you and encourage you to read some of the articles that I've written as to why Satanism is essentially a synonym for atheism, humanism, hedonism. Satanism isn't just the worship or study of Satan as an entity, as much as it is the lifestyle or practice of serving yourself, serving your natural desires as a human, rather than being dead to yourself and serving the Lord. So again, I just wanted to get a little bit into Scripture to show you some of those examples that have a basis to try and minister to what we are facing in this world, and especially today. There is so much out there that we are facing, not just in our personal lives, but as a society. The Holocaust of tens of millions of aborted babies in our country legally, when Hitler did a fraction of the slaughtering, and he is considered, and rightfully so, one of the most evil men who ever existed. That's very true. So how much more do we have blood on our hands? And I say our because we live in our society, that the enemy is able to have his altar of Baal, to go and sacrifice children at the altar of convenience. When women can give birth and give their child up for adoption, or just practice abstinence, or whatever alternative case there may be, but actually slaughtering babies. And that's a whole nother topic in of itself. The founders of Planned Parenthood and eugenics, and targeting the black community, minority communities, the feeble minded communities. So there is a lot that the enemy does to cause us to be blinded to what happens in our personal lives and in our societal existence. So I encourage you, stay strong in the Lord, put the full armor of God on, and face this world. But I hope I can give you some kind of insights, some discernment into the little trickery, that the tricks that the enemy can use throughout this ministry. And if you know somebody who is dealing with the occult, with New Age ideas, with magic, with mysticism, I encourage you to have them reach out. If not to me, somebody who is a strong Bible-believing pastor, minister. But obviously, I would welcome, and I do welcome, and I've talked to others to either pray or just have some kind of outlet, conversation, either chatting or email, to help them, to encourage them. So thank you, and may the Lord bless you.